Okay, so have you ever dreamed of being a digital nomad, working from anywhere in the world, logging in from a beach in Bali or a cafe in Lisbon? Well, today we're diving deep into the reality of this life. And spoiler alert, it's not all sunsets and laptops by the ocean. I'm Johnny and welcome to Banking Without Borders. In this episode, I'm joined by my co-host Jan, a full-time digital nomad who's been working remotely for years. Together, we're breaking down what it actually takes to make money as a digital nomad, the challenges it brings, and most importantly, how you can start your own journey if this lifestyle is something you're considering. We'll be covering everything from making money online to managing time zones, and even when it makes sense to officially leave your home country behind. Jan's got a ton of insights, so trust me, if you're interested in becoming a digital nomad or want to learn more about the lifestyle, then this is a conversation you won't want to miss. All right, let's get into it. Jan, it's good to see you. We've all seen the pictures with people using their laptops on the beach and sitting in swimming pools with laptops on the side, which is absolutely absurd. But let's be real. How much of that is true? And what are the biggest misconceptions about digital nomad life that don't get talked about?
Yeah, it's a good question, Johnny. The truth is, it's not often like that. In reality, working remotely while traveling is primarily about finding a balance between work and play. And the biggest misconception is that, you're constantly on vacation, which is definitely not the case. For me personally, there are plenty of long days where I just work from my Airbnb, try to juggle time zones, and sometimes even deal with internet issues. Yeah, it's definitely more about managing your work and travel than simply enjoying endless sunsets. And I think what's left out of those beachside laptop photos is the discipline that it takes. It's not all glamour. It's about staying focused and organized. And that can be very difficult if you have people around you that just enjoy their vacation.
Yeah, it's funny. I think it became almost fashionable, or it was a big part of during COVID, particularly, that a lot of people went remote. They escaped whichever country they were living in that maybe was more locked down than another country, and they went abroad. And I think a lot of people were interested in that type of content because they were stuck at home and they were seeing these people travel the world. And a lot of people were just sharing photos of themselves with laptops on beaches. But it's never quite like that, is it? Instagram is never the same as reality. And I can't see a world in which you can generally get, correct me if I'm wrong, but a full-time job and be successful at it while sat on a beach or sat in a swimming pool using your laptop. Do you get to dip your toe into that lifestyle at all? Are you actually participating in that? Are there moments in your life that do get to just relax maybe a little bit more and escape to the beach?
Well, I almost never work from the beach. That's for sure, just because I hate to have sand stuck to my keyboard. Just one of the worst feelings that you're gonna have. But I do have periods in my day-to-day life where I just relax a little bit more. I think that's normal. People go on vacation all the time, and especially as a digital nomad, I believe it's very important to escape once in a while and just lock off. Just to not get burned out.
Yeah, I suppose the point of working from a remote world or a remote country or going abroad is to at least enjoy that. You're not going to go and lock yourself away in a co-working space or in a hotel room 9 to 5. You are there to try and enjoy yourself as well. I do think it's important to recognize that, there are going to be moments of challenge and hardship, and it's not all going to be sunshine and roses the whole time. And I think for someone that wants to become a digital nomad, that's a very important thing to recognize immediately. If you really want to be successful in the world of work and you want to make something, you want to build something yourself, it does require hard work regardless of where you are. And working on a beach might not be conducive to really doing hard work, particularly if you want to get good Wi-Fi connection. Let's put ourselves in the shoes of someone who wants to become a digital nomad. What are the first things you recommend? Where do you even begin?
Well, it depends from where you actually start. If you have some skills already figured out that you could sell online, for example, if you know how to design websites, if you know how to write blog articles, that's something that you can easily sell online through websites like Upwork or Fiverr or one of the other freelance marketplaces, and that should definitely help you find work quickly. There's obviously some competition to it, but there are good strategies to stand out from the masses and get some clients even early on. And if you have been freelancing already, maybe you're freelancer in your home country and you have a remote job, then it's literally just about convincing your clients that you can do your job also from a foreign country. And I think nowadays that's not really difficult. It's something relatively easy to achieve, especially since COVID. Companies have been very open-minded with team members working from foreign countries. So I guess it's just about getting started and figuring out where you are and then taking the right steps.
I think there's a few things to unpack there, but I just want to go back to something you mentioned about competition. You talked about, because the digital nomad lifestyle is, we can see it all over social media. It's, you know, it's becoming this huge trend now where lots of people are making a go at this. And as someone that also hires a lot of freelancers for the YouTube channel, I see the competition. I see the amount of freelancers that are looking for work. And you said something interesting there about competing and standing out. Do you have any pieces of advice for people that want to become a digital nomad, perhaps that's going to be in like digital marketing or building websites or copywriting, on how to even get started in such a crowded marketplace?
I think what it comes down to in the beginning is getting as many good reviews as possible. Maybe even accepting gigs that you would normally not accept just to get a review from it. And then once you have a established review basis, then it's all about niching down, trying to find one specific niche you can become an expert in. And then try to position yourself with a higher price offer, and be confident in sales calls, and just try to sell your services. Yeah.
You know, you've got to be very price competitive early on, haven't you? And I don't think you should encourage people to work for free, but you've got to try to stand out and differentiate yourself somehow. And one way of doing that could be purely based on price. You know, you could try to do your work for as little as possible to get as much as possible to build those reviews. Do you think, though, that is a financially viable way to go about doing business as a digital nomad? Because I imagine the lifestyle, although you're probably existing in cheaper worlds, cheaper countries, potentially, I mean, if you're in Portugal, it's pretty expensive, particularly in Lisbon. But on the flip side, if you're in, say, Bali or Thailand, that might be a bit more affordable. So would you ever encourage that possibly, you know, start at a really low price point for whatever it is you're offering just to get as much work in to build those reviews?
I think initially you have to do that unless you have an existing relationship with a company that you can just get work from. If you log onto those platforms, you'll see that there are a lot of people that find it very conducive to work from abroad, and they're obviously competing with you. And if you don't have any reviews, then you're definitely the last choice. So to get started on those platforms, particularly, it's definitely essential to have a very low price, maybe even do it for free. I think there can be a viable strategy. The main thing should be, though, that there's at least some goal in mind, or at least some target you're trying to reach, from where you'll try to raise your prices and then niche down. And niching down, for example, if that could be becoming an expert in content marketing, right, or in designing websites. Or developing websites, and maybe even for one specific niche, dentists, for example, then you have all of a sudden a situation where your offer is pretty unique, right? There are not a lot of web designers serving purely dentists on the market, and that can be a good way to increase your rates at some point.
It's a really interesting point that you make in terms of dentistry. Like, if you're looking as a digital nomad, if you're looking to work remotely and online, and maybe web development or digital marketing is something that you're considering, looking at industries which are possibly still quite archaic or quite analog, where they need help desperately to digitize. There are people that have very limited knowledge or understanding of digital marketing or web development, but they know they need to do it. That's always a good idea. And that just reminds me of I worked in the dentistry industry in a digital marketing position for a while, and they didn't know what they were doing. And they were very attracted to the services that I could offer purely for that reason. They just needed the work. And I think if you do decide to niche down, is to look at niches where they're still quite analog, where they do need a lot of help. And dentistry, maybe like trade services, like carpentry, builders, the construction sector, smaller enterprises that don't really have a web page or don't really have a digital position, so to speak. Just to go back to those first steps as a digital nomad, do you think it would be advisable to possibly start your career, possibly, or whatever it is you want to do, before you make the move? Because in order to sustain the lifestyle, it might be important to have built up some business prior, because you don't want to get out there and really struggle to get started, to pick up momentum, to find clients, to find and gather reviews and build your business. So could that be a good piece of advice before you go, maybe try to break into the industry while possibly you still have a 9 to 5, while possibly you're still earning some income from a more solid stream of revenue?
Well, there are two approaches of doing this. One approach would be to just try to have it figured out before you actually start traveling. And that's probably the safest approach. Obviously comes with some disadvantages, right? It might take some time. You might not figure it out at all. Who knows? Really depends on the individual circumstances. But it's definitely the safest method. Another option I see, definitely trying to go to a country where the cost of living might be a little bit cheaper than your home country, with some savings obviously set aside, and then trying to figure it out from there. That could be just as viable. It really depends on your individual circumstances. The main thing is though, before one goes abroad to start this lifestyle, you need to have some types of savings at least. I would personally recommend at least 6 months of living expenses set aside, that you could then use for emergencies also.
Yeah, and there's some great resources for calculating the cost of living in certain areas. There's a website called numbeo.com, which has a cost of living calculator that I've used previously when making content around. I made a video about the best countries to live in, for example, and it's all crowdsourced. So people who live in these areas are sharing their insights, sharing the data that they have from their own costs. So like Jan's saying, it's good to build up 6 months prior. You need to know how much you're going to need. So a resource like that could be a great way to calculate what 6 months could roughly cost. You'll never properly know until you get there, but it might give you a ballpark figure to work with. And I think that's incredibly important because you don't know how long it's going to be until you start generating revenue. And you don't want to have pressure. You don't want to have pressure exerted on you in terms of, oh, I'm running out of money. Oh, I might need to leave. How am I going to pay rent next month? And that could change the business decisions that you make, the way you decide to operate. You might get more desperate. You might take jobs or work that you don't want to necessarily do, that don't interest you, that don't motivate you. Possibly if you were working for cheap and trying to gather reviews, you'll suddenly need to increase the prices of your products. And that might not work because you might not have the reviews that would justify those prices or the testimonials. So I think it is very important that 6 months, 6-month amount of savings is very important. That's a very good point. It would be very unsettling for me if I was in a foreign country and I was starting to earn money in the currency of that country because I wouldn't know what to do with it, where to place it. How do you get a bank account? Do companies online pay you in dollars? Do they pay you in pounds? Do they pay you in euros for you? So where do you even begin in terms of invoicing and receiving money in a foreign currency? And then where do you put it? There's a lot to unpack here. So I guess to dial this in, my first question would be, how do you propose being paid? Are you being paid in euros or are you being paid in dollars? Or if you're in Thailand, are you being paid in Thai baht? How does that work?
Most of my income comes from euro, and I have the majority of my expenses obviously in other countries because I do spend a lot of time outside of the Eurozone.
Are you invoicing in euros?
Yeah, that's correct. It depends on the situation I have with that individual client, but clients within the Eurozone, they do expect to be invoiced in euro.
But what if you dealt with a British company? Would you invoice a British company in sterling?
I would do it, yeah, sure. As long as they're okay with it. For me, it's a lot easier to receive a British pounds than it is for them to pay me in euros, I assume. Just because I'm more familiar with neobanks and I know about all of the multi-currency accounts that are on the market, and they might not, right?
That's a good point there. Just by invoicing a company or a person, an employer in the currency that they're familiar with, their local currency, is also going to make you probably a more popular choice because it's just easier for them to deal with. It might mean that you have to take a fee, which brings me on to my next question, but it does make you probably a more compelling proposition because you're just making their life easier. You're not asking for your local currency, for example, the Thai baht. You're not asking them to deal with that currency. If you do receive these various currencies, Jan, euro, dollar, sterling. Where do you get started in terms of depositing them? So if you're a digital nomad that's moved to Portugal, moved to Bali, moved to Thailand, how do you even, once you've sent your invoice or before you prepare your invoice, you've got to put bank details on. So where are you getting those bank details? How are you getting a bank account?
Yeah, there are a few neobanks that have that offer local bank account details in several different markets. One of them being Wise, and it's just as easy as copying the details and then pasting them onto the invoice and then just sending it out. And then you can receive, I think it's up to 10 different currencies with Wise, and the client just pays those invoices as a normal bank transfer, right? As they would pay a local vendor.
Yeah, Wise is a great choice because you've got all of those local currency accounts. It's also available for people in many or from many areas of the world. If you're living in Europe, it's probably very likely that you can open a Wise account. So you could open that Wise account, right? And then you could move to this country that you want to work remotely from and then use that account to be paid. I guess that answers the question in terms of avoiding currency exchange fees, right? Because you're depositing the money directly into a US dollar account, so you don't need to exchange it. But if you were to, you would then use your Wise account to spend money in, say, Thai baht, and then Wise would take care of the currency exchange?
Yeah, well, typically I can't use the account I use to receive the invoice payments for personal expenses because it's a corporate account, right? And I then have to, pay myself a salary from that account. And I typically, at least the day-to-day expenses, I do deposit them to Wise and also Revolut and a few other neobanks. And then I use them. Revolut is a little better throughout the week, while Wise has a better exchange rate on the weekend. That really depends on the individual circumstances. One thing that it's not being talked about a lot that you haven't mentioned actually, Johnny, is the exchange rate fluctuation and the risk that comes with it. Typically, you want to be in a position where you're not spending all of the money that you receive through your freelancing or through your remote work, but you do have at least a certain amount that you can set aside and then save or invest. You gotta manage exchange rates quite a bit, and there needs to be at least some type of strategy in place. And I typically try to hold my savings in at least two different currencies, typically in euro and then in US dollars, and then try to invest into global assets. Mainly for better diversification of risks.
So you're suggesting putting some money aside, which is obviously, common sense. Savings are really important. Do you use like a Wise savings account? I know they have Wise Interest. Or are there other platforms or places that you could recommend where people could transfer that money out of, say, for example, their Wise account to somewhere else where they could then generate savings, or if they're willing to be a bit more risky, maybe put it into an index fund, which, to be fair, has relatively low risk?
Well, the availability of brokerage accounts really depends on whether someone is still registered in the country of origin or whether they have permanently left that country of origin and then possibly registered in another country. Within the Eurozone, there are a few really good offers. Trade Republic is one. Trade Republic, I think they do offer a fixed interest deposit account, and they also have some relatively high interest on the idle money that you keep in there. And then obviously they do allow for investments into stocks, bonds, ETFs, and whatever you can think of. I think even cryptocurrencies for a very low fee. For people that have left their country of origin, I do recommend looking into Interactive Brokers. That's a really good broker that I can recommend. I also personally use. But there's also Charles Schwab in the USA, which also accepts international clients. They're very open about it, easy to work with, and they do pay high interest amounts on the idle money and allow access to various forms of investments.
It's good advice for a digital nomad that started to create some wealth and make some money and wants to put it into some savings. And it's also very important that these recommendations have openness or availability for those possibly residing in other countries, or with maybe an original residence in one country but might be living somewhere else. I want to just go into something which is very important in terms of being a digital nomad, and that's, we talked a little bit about the reality, but I want to hear a bit more from you as well about the hardest part of being abroad and being a digital nomad. I I think this is probably something that doesn't really get covered well enough. The mental health factor, especially. I mean, do you get lonely? Do you miss home? Do you miss your family?
I do miss my family, obviously, but I try to visit them at least once a year for about 2 weeks. It's not that much time, but I do know people that are working in a different city that they grew up in that also don't have a very regular contact with their, at least physical contact with their parents. And I at least try to be as active as I possibly can on the phone. Call them whenever I have some spare time available. The thing about friendship, that's actually a very good point that you mentioned. It's a negative aspect of this lifestyle. It's just a matter of fact that a lot of people, they don't live location independent, and they do live in one region, so it's really hard to keep in touch whenever you're leaving a place. And some friendships, they last, some don't. It really depends. I personally try to I build my circle of friends in several countries that I usually come back to on a regular basis, and then we just try to catch up as often as possible. But it's challenging, yeah.
Have you ever done business within the country that you're living in? Like, has it always been just purely remote work, so to speak? Or are you aware of anyone that does that moves to countries like Thailand and knocks on doors, if that's a thing, and tries to generate business locally?
Yeah, that's something I would definitely not recommend. And I don't know anyone doing that for visa reasons, for tax reasons, that can get you into really big trouble. So in case someone is thinking of that, I strongly advise against it.
Good advice. Don't take my advice. Don't go knocking on doors. Okay. Okay, so you're obviously working across multiple time zones because you're only working online. You're not working locally. So how are you dealing with that? How are you organizing meetings?
Yeah, I think flexibility is key. When you're working with people that are sitting on the other side of the world, having a 9 to 5 work-life balance, it's not possible. And I personally find myself often working at very uncomfortable hours. But that's just a downside of this lifestyle I'm happy to live with, to be honest. And one thing I can recommend is that if you have very late or very early meetings regularly, then try to move them to 1 or 2 days within the week. And then it's much easier to adjust to that, right? If you have to stay up very late for 2 days in a week, it's easier than doing that every day of the week. And then, I mean, I personally, I rather have one day where I stay up, very, very late, maybe even past midnight, than having 3 or 4 days where I go to bed or I stop my working day at 9. But that's just a matter of preference. And but that's my recommendation here.
It's a good recommendation because there's nothing worse than like an extended period of sleep deprivation. It's going to impact your work, your motivation, your ambition. And that's probably a very good piece of advice. It's obviously personal preference, but trying to front load your longer days or your later meetings at the beginning of your week, possibly when you're well rested from the weekend, so you can get away with having like a larger sleep debt. And then as you go into the back end of the week, you can start to get more sleep and start to catch up. Are you speaking from experience in terms of the side effects of that, Jan? Have you experienced burnout? Have you had any problems with sleep at all?
I haven't experienced burnout, and I typically don't have many problems with sleep, but that's just because I'm relatively disciplined. Personally, I don't go out and party. I usually try to be in bed by 9:30 latest, sometimes even by 10, and then I have those 2 days. In my work week. It's typically Monday and Tuesday. At least that's how it's currently set up. Where I have to just stay up a little bit late, and that's okay. I mean, I'm usually a little more tired on Wednesdays, but it's something that I can easily handle personally.
Can you tell me what your favorite part of this lifestyle is? Tell me what the best and the worst parts of being a digital nomad are.
Yeah, it's definitely not the sand between the toes, or in the laptop keyword. I think the best part is probably the freedom to explore new places and connect with other like-minded professionals whenever I want to, and to go wherever I want to. That's a huge freedom that not a lot of people have. Most people that are living a standard life, they might go on vacation once or twice a year, but that's it. On the other hand, I can be, technically, if I wanted to, on a vacation, all day long, right? Just working a little bit less, and then just enjoying more of my personal free time, if I wanted to. And the worst part, unpredictability, whether it's a missed flight or not knowing if the Wi-Fi will work for a meeting. That's something I truly hate. I'm a person that likes to plan ahead, and I do try this to do this as good as I can, but some things just can't be planned. And then whenever I find myself in those situations where things go wrong, it's very uncomfortable to me personally. And it's something, it's definitely the worst part for me.
Based on your personality, Jan, I don't know if you're necessarily the type that I would imagine to be a digital nomad. I feel like the life in itself invites a lot of spontaneity. It invites a lot of chaos, potentially. Not that anyone listening to this should expect a chaotic lifestyle, but it could be chaotic. You know, you've been able to maintain this personality that you have that's quite efficient, quite regimented. That's nothing to do with being German. That's just who you are. So how do you manage to maintain that in a world that could be crazy?
Yeah, it's a good question. Not sure I know the full answer to this. I guess it comes down to being disciplined, trying to plan ahead, whether it's working hours, free time, whether it's travel, and then just trying to stick to it as much as possible.
So if someone listening to this, Jan, wants to start tomorrow, they just want to pack up, book a flight and go, what's the number one piece of advice you'd give them?
Don't just pack up and go without thinking how you'll sustain yourself financially, and how you'll handle all the challenges that I just mentioned. Definitely important to set aside at least 6 months of living expenses to live comfortably and to make this work. And then also, whenever you do decide to pack up and leave, give yourself a few months where you can test out the lifestyle and then decide afterwards if it's something for you, or if you rather go back to a normal lifestyle.
All right. Awesome. So I guess we've talked about the reality. We've talked about the money and the biggest challenges, or some of the biggest challenges of being a digital nomad. But I think there's still a huge piece missing. So next week, I think it would be good if we dived into some of the best and worst places to live as a digital nomad, because you talked about, you referenced about cost of living earlier, and I think that could be quite interesting to look at maybe some of the cheaper and more expensive places to live. So we could look at where to go and also where to avoid and what actually matters when choosing a country. So that could be whether it's taxation, which is something you briefly mentioned earlier, or visas, or, as I said, cost of living. You up for that?
Looking forward to the call.
Awesome. Okay, well, thank you, everybody, for tuning in today. As always, if you could subscribe to the podcast, drop us a comment below. If you're watching this on YouTube, let us know what you thought. It'd be great to hear from you. And we'll see you next week for another episode of Banking Without Borders. I'm Johnny. This is Jan. It's been good to see you. And we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everybody. Bye.